he put a chair up in front of the class. He says, prove to me from everything you've learned this semester that this chair does not exist. Oh my goodness. Students were scratching their heads. They get out their booklets. They start writing and writing. If you've ever taken one of those tests where you get the booklets to write your essays in, oh my goodness. There's one gal, she filled the whole book, all 30 pages. She just writing for all she was worth. Other ones were writing like crazy. Well, one guy sat there, thought a couple seconds, just jotted a little bit down, went up, and handed his paper in. I mean, he was done in like a minute and a half. And everybody was like, what? How did he do that? What in the world? So, next day, test scores are posted. Everybody, of course, was checking theirs first. But the next thing they were checking was that guy's. How in the world did he write this? So they look at his score, and he got an A. From like a minute and a half of work in philosophy, he's got an A. What in the world did he write? So they cornered him in the cafeteria, and they said, dude, what answer did you turn in? And he took out a piece of paper, and he wrote down, so even as Job was dearly anticipating God's answer to all his questions, just like these guys cornering this guy in the cafeteria. And God didn't give a long answer. We've been looking at 37 chapters of Job so far, and God's answer was 38, 39, 40, and 41. Just 4 chapters to give his answer. And actually the core of it is found in chapter 40, verses 6 through 14. So I'm going to concentrate on that, but I'm going to draw some other stuff in as well. Job chapter 40. The Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Would you discredit my justice? Would you condemn me to justify yourself? To be wrong for you to be right? Or why are you wrong and I am right? To simplify it even more, Job, I'm not your enemy here. Job felt like he was arm wrestling God in the chapters that we looked at. Why is God doing this to me? What's going on? God must be against me. He's not being just because I haven't done anything wrong. When really it wasn't an arm wrestling match. It was a handshake. God was helping him through this time. What if, Job, it's not about justice at all? We know from the beginning of Job that God loved this guy. God saw this guy as powerful in his faith. And that's the only reason he brought this guy to Satan's attention. It wasn't because Job was so wrong. It was because Job was so right. And God knew that his faith could stand up to this test. Job, you and I are enemies. I don't have to be wrong for you to be right. You don't have to be right and me wrong. And that's not what we're doing here. Do you have an arm like God's? And can your voice thunder like his? As I was meditating on this section here, God is saying, you know what? My arm is so big, when I move it, a lot of things happen. When I really stretch into a situation, I have so much power, it changes things rapidly. I have to be very careful how I use my arm of power. We think, why don't we see God working more in history? Why isn't he doing more things here, there, and fixing things and getting things right? Well, God says, listen, I've got so much power, I have to be very careful how I use it. And you have no understanding of the level of power that I have. When you do something with your arm, it affects one or two things or one or two people. When I do something and move my arm, it affects a lot. And can your voice thunder like his? When I really speak, I get everybody's attention. When I really use my authority and speak up, things happen. We know when God spoke up on the top of Mount Sinai. I remember his people came there. Moses led them there. God was on the top of Mount Sinai. He started to speak, and it sounded like thunder, and it blew the whole top off the mountain. It was like a volcano went off. God says, I have got such power and authority that I have to be very careful about how I use it. You have no idea, Job, what it's like to have that kind of power and authority. And then God did something just fantastic here. Then adorn yourself with glory and splendor, and clothe yourself in honor and majesty. Put on my robes for a day. Become like me. Wrap up. Have my authority, my splendor, my glory. And what are you going to do with it? Now, we've watched 35 chapters back and forth, Job and his friends, Job and his friends. So we got an idea of how they think. Unleash the fury of your wrath. Look at all who are proud and bring them low. Look at all who are proud and humble them. Crush the wicked where they stand. Bury them all in the dust together. Shroud their faces in the grave. God is saying, you know what? From what I have heard from you guys, Job, if you wrapped up in my robes of authority and you had that authority for a day, you would be out there crushing every proud person that you could find and every wicked person that you could find. This is the only level at which you can save yourself, is operating at my level. But you can't operate at my level because all you want to do is crush injustice. That's all you're thinking about. There's no mercy involved in this. I remember, I think it was a sermon or two ago, Job's friend said, listen, the evil don't get away with it. God eventually gets them. And Job said, no, oh, wait a minute, since you brought that up, I've seen all kinds of evil people get away with stuff. They seem to live in perfect comfort. Their children grow up and they're in perfect comfort. And I don't think that's fair. And God is saying, you know what? If you put on those robes, you would be crushing and destroying all those people. But would you really know all their backstory? Would you really know how they got to where they are in the first place? What evils have been done to them that caused them to become the people that they are? I know it all, and I have to keep it all in balance. And I have to sort it all out in my wisdom. And yes, there are a few times where I do have to thunder my voice, and I have to move with strength. But most of the time, I can't operate that way because it's just too complex for me to do that. And then God goes on and he talks about two big monsters that back in that day they knew well. As soon as he mentioned their names, they knew who he was talking about. We don't have them anymore. Some have said that they might have been dinosaurs. Some would say this is evidence of a dragon. Others say it's a hippopotamus and a great blue whale. I don't know. All I know is God calls them Behemoth and Leviathan. But when you saw these critters as a human being, Your first instinct was to run, and your second instinct, if you were cornered, is I have to kill this thing before it kills me, because it is so big and dangerous. And here's what God says about it. It ranks first among the works of God. This is the behemoth, the land creature. Someone says hippopotamus. Yet its maker can approach it with his sword. The hills bring it their produce, and all the wild animals play nearby. So you guys think it's dangerous? But I've seen it out in the wild, and it really doesn't bother most of the other wild animals. Maybe when humans bother it, it eats produce. It's a herbivore. It eats plants. Under the lotus plants it lies, hiding among the reeds in the marsh. The lotuses conceal it in their shadow. The poplars by the stream surround it. A raging river does not alarm it. It is secure, though the Jordan should surge up against its mouth. Can anyone capture it by the eyes or trap it and pierce its nose? This is a powerful foe. You guys want to kill it. I love it. I think it's great. I love hanging out with a behemoth. It turned out just the way I wanted it to be, and I enjoy being with it. Yes, the world that I made is beautiful, and because it's fallen, it's dangerous too. Originally, the behemoth wouldn't have been your enemy, but now it is. But it's not my enemy. God sees things in a whole different way than Job can even get around. Now, you remember Job was like, yeah, if God holds back the waters, there's a drought. And if God lets them off, there's a flood. You know, this picture of God just kind of being careless with nature. Well, earlier in God's answer, he says, you know, I make sure lions get their prey so they can feed their young. And he says, there's this bird, the ostrich, Job. You won't believe this. But the ostrich just lays its egg flat on the ground and then runs away and does its thing. And the implication is, I make sure those eggs hatch. Right? God says, I water these far remote places where no human being is, but I make sure they get rain. Job, you have no idea all the things that I'm doing and how involved I am in nature. Your life is just one little tiny bit part of it. I care about it too, but I've got a whole realm that I'm dealing with. And part of the realm is dangerous. In a fallen world, it's dangerous. Job had not experienced dangerous up until this point. You remember the things that happened to Job, now they piled up on him all at once. But they're things that can happen to any of us. Stuff stolen. Anybody ever had their stuff stolen? Identity theft? Any of that? Have your credit card stolen? All that fun stuff? Job had a loved one die. His kids. We've all had loved ones die in this room. And he got really sick. Like bad sick. We've all been sick. Struggled with that as well. All the things that happened to Job, they piled up on him. That was Satan's doing. But he had never really experienced what it was like to live in a fallen world. And God says, okay, I think Job's ready. I think he can handle this. And he started to put Job back into the fallen world that the rest of us live in, which includes things like the behemoth. He goes on and he talks about the Leviathan. This is the water one. Some say a water dinosaur. Some say giant whale. You know, there's all kinds of theories out there, of course. Can you pull in Leviathan with a fish? Its tongue with a its jaw with a hook. Will it keep begging you for mercy? Will it speak to you with gentle words? So you guys, it's way out of control for you, but to me, it speaks to me gently. And it just doesn't want me to harm it. And it's like a pet. I know it can't be to you because this is a dangerous fallen world, but to me it's a pet. I can handle this. So not only do we live in a dangerous fallen world, beautiful, but dangerous, God can handle any dangers that come at us. Even if they're as big as Leviathan, even if they're as big as Behemoth, God can handle that. Job learned a lot from God's answer. He learned that he and God weren't enemies, that he was right, that he hadn't done anything wrong, that he and God were on the same side. He learned that God exercised his power and authority with great care, that God not instantly moving against an evil person wasn't a sign of weakness, but a sign of care. He held many factors in balance at once. God used his power in a lot of gentle ways to preserve that ostrich egg. I love that picture of this poor, vulnerable little egg just sitting there. And God just taking care of that egg, making sure it gets to hatch. God uses his power in gentle ways. Mountain bird. Job learned that the evil he thought he saw in others was seen differently from God's perspective. God looked not just